He wore the veil, they said, because of a blemish. Some called it conceit, others atonement. But whatever the cause, no one had seen Lord Blackwood's face in 10 years, not even his departed wife. The dispatch arrived on a Thursday, sealed in black wax, the sort used for sorrow. Eleanor Vance read it once, then again. Its phrasing was formal but unmistakable. You are to marry the Marquis of Blackwood. The ceremony is to take place within the fortnight. It was not a plea. It was an arrangement. Her brother's gambling debts had reached beyond their means, and the cost of his life had come wrapped in silk stationery. Eleanor did not shriek nor weep. She simply folded the dispatch and placed it in her lap, staring at the fire until it cracked too loudly. By the end of the week, she sat alone in a carriage winding its way through the woods of Shadowfen, the sky gray as tarnished pewter. Her only companion was a nervous maid named Bess, and the growing certainty that her life was no longer her own. Blackwood Manor appeared suddenly, like a bruise in the landscape, its stone facade worn and unreadable. Not a single lamp burned in its windows. The footman who greeted them was silent. The staff bowed but did not speak. And when Eleanor was shown to her chambers, it was Bess who whispered what none dared say aloud. "They call him the Spectre, miss. They say he walks the halls after midnight, that he dines alone, that he speaks only to the housekeeper." Eleanor said nothing. She merely looked out at the mist-laced trees and tried not to shiver. The wedding took place the next morning. No guests, no music, only the creaking of wood and the scent of lavender laid beneath her hem. He stood at the altar like a shadow, a tall figure in black, gloved hands and the famed ivory veil that covered him from brow to jaw. The vicar's voice was a distant hum. She spoke her vows with measured clarity, her voice the only warmth in the room. He did not touch her hand. He did not kiss her cheek. He only bowed slightly as though acknowledging a contract sealed, and left the chapel before she could rise from the altar. That night, she dined alone. A week passed. She heard his footsteps outside her door at night, slow, even, never hesitating. Once she thought he paused, as if listening, but when she opened the door, the hallway was empty. Another time she found a book on her writing desk, poems by Wordsworth, her favorite. The binding was worn, and a dry rose had been pressed into the last page. She hadn't told anyone about the poem she loved. She hadn't met. He stood before a portrait of a woman, fair, soft-featured, young. His veil was the same, his gloved hands folded behind his back. When he heard her steps, he did not startle. "That was my sister," he said, voice smooth but distant. "She died in winter, too gentle for this world." Eleanor remained near the doorway. "Was it recent?" 8 years. I still hear her laughter on cold mornings." She nodded, unsure what else to say. "I should not have married you," he added. "Then why did you?" He turned halfway, the firelight brushing against the side of his veil. "Because I owed your brother clemency, and you were the only thing he had worth saving." Eleanor's breath caught. Before she could speak, he bowed and vanished through a hidden door in the wall. The next day it rained, the kind of cold rain that silenced even the birds. Bess had taken ill, and Eleanor wandered the library alone. She did not hear him enter until he spoke. "Do you find the books adequate?" She turned slowly. He stood by the fireplace, distant as ever. "They're wonderful," she said, "though many pages are annotated. In your hand." He nodded. "You study poetry and medicine and astronomy," she said, walking toward him, "but you live like a ghost." He didn't answer, only looked toward the rain-laced window. "Did something happen to your face?" she asked gently. "Or to your heart?" He moved then, closer than before, not touching, but near enough. She could see the tension in his throat. "Both," he said. She did not press. Instead, she stepped beside him, shoulder to shoulder, and for a full minute they listened to the rain. That night, her door opened. She did not stir, but in the moonlight she saw his shadow cross the room. He placed something on her nightstand, a pendant, her mother's, the one she had lost on the journey here. He stood there, veil gleaming faintly for a long moment. Then he turned and left, saying only, "Good night, Eleanor." And for the first time since she arrived, she felt something bloom in the hollowness of her chest. Not love, not yet, but something brave enough to stay. Eleanor woke with the pendant still curled in her palm. The silver had grown warm against her skin, as if it had slept beside her too. The lamp had long since burned down, but she could still see where his shadow had stood, where he had looked at her and said her name. A name he had not used until that moment, a name that had never sounded softer. She rose slowly. The butler's brow creased, not rudely, but with something like surprise. "His lordship does not take meals in company," he said. "Not even with his wife?" she asked. He hesitated, then offered a tight nod of apology. "Especially not." She took her tea in the conservatory where the windows glowed with frost and the silence pressed like velvet. She ate little, but lingered long, waiting for a step that did not come, a shadow that did not pass. She told herself she was only observing, but her heart knew better. It had already begun to reach out. By afternoon, she wandered toward the western corridor again, drawn by something she could not name. The gallery was empty, save for the hush of old portraits and pale light striping the floor, but someone had been there. A book had been moved. A candle had been burned halfway down, and on the edge of the velvet chaise, a single glove, black, creased at the fingers, had been left behind. Eleanor looked at it for a long moment before picking it up. It was still warm. She turned, heart quickening, and found the hallway empty behind her, and yet she felt watched. Not ominously, but almost tenderly, as though someone had stepped into the light just long enough to be seen, then slipped away again. That evening she found him in the library, not veiled, not startled, but still cloaked in a silence of his own making. He stood before the hearth with one arm resting against the mantel. When she entered, he turned, not fully, but enough to acknowledge her. "You left your glove," she said, holding it out. His gaze dropped to her hand, then back to her face. "Did you think I meant for you to find it?" She hesitated. "I hoped you had." His lips curved faintly. "I forget you're bolder than most." She stepped closer, slowly. "And you forget I'm not afraid of specters." "Not when they return pendants to girls they barely know." That made him pause. He reached for the glove. Their fingers brushed, and neither of them moved away. He turned from her then, not out of coldness, but as if her presence had startled something soft in him. He walked toward the shelves and trailed a gloved finger along the spines. "My mother used to say every book hides a heart waiting to be read aloud," he murmured. "And do you believe that?" she asked. He paused. "Not until now." Eleanor felt the air shift again, thicker, warmer. She joined him by the window. Rain, and somehow he kept reading. Later that night, a knock came at her door. Not the silence of his footsteps. This was deliberate. She opened it, candle in hand. He stood there, veil in one hand, the other still gloved. "Come, walk with me," he said. No explanation, no apology, just a quiet invitation. She stepped into the corridor beside him. They moved without destination, each hallway more shadowed than the last. "Do you ever tire of silence?" she asked. "Only when it means nothing," he said. "With you it means everything." Her heart stuttered. They paused by a stained glass window where moonlight fractured into pale blues and purples. He looked at her, not her face, not her dress, but her. "I've been alone a long time," he said, "and I'm afraid I don't know how to be anything else." She didn't speak. She simply reached up, brushing a loose curl from her temple. A gesture so simple, it made him exhale, as if something heavy had lifted. "You've never asked about the fire," he said. "I thought you'd tell me." "When it no longer hurt," she replied. He turned to her then, fully, no veil, no curtain of avoidance. And in his eyes was the story, the sorrow, the shadow of a man who had nearly let himself disappear. "I didn't expect you to be kind," he whispered. "Nor did I expect you to stay." Eleanor's throat tightened. "And yet, here I am." He stepped closer. No sudden movement, just a hand rising slowly to rest over hers. It was the first time he had touched her without necessity. "You make me feel seen," he said. She shook her head gently. "You make yourself seen." "I only refuse to look away." Then softly, without announcement, he leaned forward. Their lips met with a hush of two silences, finally speaking. It was not dramatic, it was not grand, it was authentic, and that made it beautiful. When he pulled back, he lingered, forehead brushing hers, his hand still on hers, as if he feared she might vanish. But she didn't. She stayed. And in that staying, something in him began to breathe again. They stood in the dim corridor until the candle burned low, neither speaking, neither needing to. What had been fear had become stillness. What had been avoidance had become peace. What had been two people broken now held the shape of something almost whole. But outside the corridor, beyond the hush of candlelight and quiet breath, the rain struck harder against the glass. She wanted to believe the moment would hold, but deep down, she knew. Something still waited to be tested. Not everything survived the light. Morning came too soon. The sky had turned from bruised indigo to washed-out gray, and the corridor outside her door was quiet. Too quiet. No footsteps, no echo of his retreat. The candle that had lit their kiss was gone, and in its place, only the memory of warmth lingered against her palm. Eleanor dressed slowly, as though each layer might shield her from the weight of expectation. She thought he might appear at breakfast, but when she entered the conservatory, it was set for one. One plate, one cup, one silence, pressing down harder than the rain ever had. She sat, untouched toast on porcelain, and wondered if intimacy had frightened him more than solitude ever had. The staff were courteous but guarded, as if sensing the air had changed but unsure which way the wind would blow. Even Bess avoided her gaze, though she smiled too much, as though trying to say, "You're the mistress now." But Eleanor did not feel like a mistress. She felt like a question, still waiting for its answer. Mid-morning passed in a haze of pacing and half-read pages. She wandered the halls they had walked together. Every corner seemed to echo with him. The place where he'd spoken of silence, the window where moonlight had softened his eyes, the place where he had said, "You make me feel seen." And yet he was nowhere to be found. It wasn't until just before dusk that a folded note appeared beneath her door. No seal, no name, but she knew the hand. She unfolded it with trembling fingers, eyes scanning the slanted ink. "Meet me where the ivy climbs beyond the chapel wall, if you still wish to." Her heart kicked against her ribs. There was no signature, no assurance, but there was hope. She wrapped herself in her shawl and went without hesitation. The path was slick with rain, the stones dark as ink. She reached the old chapel, breath quick, the ivy catching on her sleeve, and there, half in shadow, half in light, stood the man she had kissed and never truly known. He wore no veil, not tonight, not with her. His hair was damp, his expression unreadable. For a moment they simply stared. Then, quietly, he spoke. "I'm not sure what I'm doing." She stepped forward. "Neither am I." His voice dropped lower. "I've spent years hiding in silence, and now I fear I have no language left for this." She reached for his hand, bare now, chilled from the air. "Then let's write something new." He looked at her as if the weight of those words had stunned him, as if they were permission he hadn't dared ask for. And then slowly, like something ancient unfolding, he pulled her into his arms and let his forehead rest against hers. They stood like that for a long time, as though the silence between them had taken root. Then he stepped back, just enough to see her face. "I don't know what comes next," he admitted. "But I know I don't want to walk it alone." She smiled, through the damp, through the doubt. "You won't." He took her hand again, as if to seal the words. "Will you choose me again, Eleanor? Not because of what we survived, but for who I am now." She nodded slowly. "I choose you, and I'll keep choosing you, as long as you keep showing up without the veil." He let out the kind of breath that sounded like it had waited a lifetime, and then, without ceremony, without fear, he kissed her again. Not out of surprise, but reverence. A sealing of something already formed. That night they did not dine apart. They walked the halls, not as strangers, but as something close to whole. And when morning came again, it did not steal anything away. It brought light to what had begun in shadow. Because some love does not vanish in daylight. It stays. It endures. It unmasks us and calls us home.